The following episode of Film Talk is brought to you by HostGator. HostGator is a leading provider of shared, resold VPS and dedicated hosting solutions. Their award-winning support is available 24/7 via phone, email, and live chat. Discover why over 9 million websites trust HostGator and sign up for a new hosting package using the coupon code GAMEITALL and receive 25% off your first hosting plan.
The producers of Reanimator and From Beyond take you to a town on the edge of madness, where people have become prey for an evil under the ground.
These damn things have been living under our feet and tearing us apart for 20 years!
A lurking fear that hides an unholy fortune.
In that cemetery is buried a guy who is stuffed with money. This is your family legacy, kid.
Now,
Don't even breathe.
Hey, I don't know what you people got going on here.
As soon as we blow the cemetery, you can walk away.
criminals have come to dig for treasure.
Well, I'll make all of this very easy for you. I'm just here for the money.
In a cemetery of the damned. And hell has risen to hunt them.
It started.
I knew we'd be brought together. I'm in.
Frenzy's John Finch. Blake Bailey. Hellraisers Ashley Lawrence. Ghosts Vincent Schiavelli. And Reanimators Jeffrey Combs. In H.P. Lovecraft's The Lurking Fear.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Film Talk here on GameItAll.com. I've got a very special guest here today, Mr. Now, I don't know if I'm supposed to say the C, so I'll say C. Courtney Joyner.
That's just perfect.
All right. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh no, this is great. I love rooting through the ashes.
Well, and today you are currently on the promotion train, I guess, for the Blu-ray release of a film you made back in 1994 called Lurking Fear. Now that was out on June 15th, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, and so talk about Lurking Fear then, right off the bat. What was your experience like making that film?
Well, Lurking Fear had kind of a long history actually because it was my second movie as a director. In fact, I've only directed 2 films since I've been primarily as a writer. But I had done a movie for Charlie Band and Full Moon before that. I did the third Trancers movie, and everyone was pretty happy with that. And so Charlie looked at the slate of films that were coming up, and Lurking Fear was going to be one of the movies. And since it was H.P. Lovecraft, of course, Stuart Gordon was going to direct it. And Stuart was going off to do something else. And so Charlie had this slot open. And the way the company was working at the time, Paramount was distributing everything. So it was kind of a conveyor belt of product. It was going to get made one way or the other because it had been announced. So he let me go ahead and jump in and try my hand, such as it was. But that was also one of the first films that Full Moon had done that was shot in Romania. And they actually broke ground for their new studio while we were making this movie. and that was became Castell Studios, which is like the largest film studio now in Eastern Europe. But we actually never got to shoot there. We were at another studio while they were building their new one. But it was a wild experience because here I was. I kept saying I feel like J. Lee Thompson or something in 1966, doing Terrace Bulba. Because there I was, and I was in Eastern Europe. I was directing this excellent cast headed by an actor who I admired very much, John Finch. And it was terrific. And unfortunately, I had a lot of good friends along, not only Jeff Combs, who I'd worked with before, but my cousin Allison Mackey was in the cast, and a good friend of mine, Joe Levengood, was playing one of the thugs, and I had brought him over. And so it felt it was a nice cradling because I had so much support on Trancers 3 that I kind of wanted to try and duplicate that in Romania. I wasn't entirely successful, but that was how it all got started.
Awesome. And you mentioned the cast and Jeffrey Combs. I'm curious because you said Stuart Gordon was originally attached. Was Jeff attached at the time when Stuart was?
I don't know that he was. I know that I never read Dennis Paoli's script. I know it was set in the 1930s, and there was supposedly a very significant role for Barbara Crampton actually playing a reporter kind of based, as Stewart said, on Joan Blondell in the early Warner Brothers movies. So that sounded like a lot of fun to me. I'm sure Jeff would have been involved, of course, since he was not only Stewart's great friend and signature star, but he was at the time the actor associated with H.P. Lovecraft, whether he's doing it for Charles Band in Full Moon or Stuart Gordon or doing something like Necronomicon. Jeffrey was the H.P. Lovecraft actor. So I can't imagine at that time any movie being made about Lovecraft or from a Lovecraft story that he wasn't going to be involved with or they wanted him to be involved with.
Yeah, exactly. And in this movie, I mean, he chain smokes and looks like a badass. I mean, I don't know what else you want.
I love what we did with him in this because he has never adopted this look for anything else. And I thought it was so cool that he did this. We talked about it a lot. And he said, well, I want to try something. I want to go in a slightly different direction. Because he didn't want echoes of Herbert West to be in absolutely everything he did, of course. Because he's too skilled an actor. He's too versatile. So I told him, oh, this is great. And he says, well, let me grow a beard. And he did, and he looked wonderful, and with the chain smoking and the drinking, and I just wanted a whole different stripe to what Jeff usually was required to do, and I think he just gave a terrific performance.
Yeah, and that was also, I'd also noticed that he did look a lot different. Like he's not the same guy in that you see in Reanimator or Bride of Reanimator.
No, or From Beyond.
Yeah, exactly. But he still has that charisma, right? It shines right through anything he does, I find. Oh
yeah, no, he was terrific, and he was also too, if you will, a little bit of the energy of the individual scenes because he is always moving. He was always dancing on his feet, and I think that was in contrast to someone like John, who was a lot more stoic, and I think that worked very well.
Yeah, he's very animated.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. The scene with Jeff that I really loved was there was a moment when he and Ashley Lawrence are planting dynamite in the graveyard to try and kill the monsters. And in his own clumsy way, he confesses that he's in love with her, and she rejects him. And before we shot that, it was at night, before we shot that sequence, Jeff and I were standing around talking, and I said, this is you asking the prettiest girl in your class to the prom. And you know you're going to get shot down. And he got it just instantly. It was fantastic. I just love what he did.
Yeah, he is wonderful. I am glad he's still acting today. Like, not as much, but he's still around today doing some stuff.
Have you seen the Edgar Allan Poe show?
No. Is that a one-man show? I heard of it.
Yeah, it's a one-man show, Nevermore, and Stewart directed it. Actually, I think Dennis Paoli actually wrote it as well. And it's just tremendous. Absolutely fantastic.
Is that in L.A.?
Oh, he's been touring the country with it.
Okay. We always get a bit limited up here in the Great White North.
No, it's wonderful. In fact, I think they have been to Canada and back and forth. But if you have a chance to see it, or I think it's now been recorded, it is really worth it. It's just stunning how wonderful he is in it.
Excellent. So I want to talk about sort of your career versatility, because I noticed, like, let's going back even back to 1987, you wrote a film called Prison with a really young Viggo Mortensen, and then up to 2004 you had Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys. So very different.
Oh yes.
So I'm just wondering, how did you get involved in all this and in filmmaking in general?
Well, I'm one of those guys who was like an extraordinarily obnoxious child, probably carried over to this very moment. Always focused on movies and comic books and things like that. And I was very lucky to grow up in the middle of the whole monster boom and Famous Monsters of Filmland and Hammer Films and Universal horror movies on TV and the golden age of Marvel Comics and Neil Adams drawing Green Lantern and Conan paperback books. I mean, it was like overstimulation if you dug this stuff, because it was like everywhere. Aurora model kits and Castle Films and everything. So I was totally surrounded by that stuff, completely captivated by it. So I was always trying to do something with movies, shooting Super 8 movies in the backyard with my friends and all of that stuff. And by the time I was in high school, I started writing letters to film directors I admired. And it was great because they actually were very kind and they would respond because, of course, in these days, this is all pre-DVD and even pre-VHS. So a lot of these fantastic talents were essentially anonymous except to people who knew film. Mm-hmm. So if you wrote a letter to Don Siegel or Arthur Penn or Robert Aldrich or any of these guys like I was doing, they always wrote you back because it's like, wow, how nice to hear from someone. They didn't, so it was, so that was always just wonderful. But that was really where I was coming from. And then I went to USC, and while I was there, I did a documentary on Sam Peckinpah for a Western class, and got to know Warren Oates and L.Q. Jones and that whole great gang, and Bo Hopkins. I just did actually a commentary with Bo for a movie for 20th Century Fox just about 3 days ago. And L.Q. and I are still great friends, and he's in his 90s. But I got to know Sam a little bit, and so it was kind of one thing going after another. And right after I graduated, I had been corresponding with a director at Universal Studios. Actually, he had read a script of mine and asked me to come over to Universal and work with him on television shows. And his name was Virgil Vogel. And Virgil, of course, was the film editor on Touch of Evil. And he was the primary director at that time on Magnum P.I. and Airwolf, and he was also directing Miami Vice. So he asked me to work with him on scripts for those television shows.
Oh, wow.
So it was great. And most of it was anonymous work because I'd read it. And this was at the time when episodic directors would get a director's pass on a script that they would hand in their notes and things. So literally what I was doing is I would read the script, Virgil would read it, then we'd talk about things, and I sometimes would bring up stuff. He'd go, oh, hey, that's a great idea. And then he would pass it on to the writing staff. I mean, I couldn't jump in there. But we sold a few stories to Universal. I sold an original Knight Rider and some things like that. And that really, but it was great because I was on the lot and meeting all these guys, and I was like, oh my gosh, you did this great Audie Murphy Western in 1957. I mean, it was a total pain to everybody, I know. But it was a great learning experience. And right during that time, my housemates, all my friends from college, Jeff Burr and Darren Scott and Jeff's brother, we had decided to try and make a feature film. And this was right at the height of indie horror and, of course, Halloween and Friday the 13th, but also the VHS boom. So everybody was looking for product. And they raised the money, and I co-wrote the script for a movie called The Offspring. It was also called From a Whisper to a Scream, starring Vincent Price. And while that was going on, an old buddy from college was working for Irwin Yablans and Bruce Cone Curtis. And I had written a futuristic prison treatment for him that was never made. We didn't ever do anything with it. But he had showed it to Irwin and Bruce because they had a project called Horror in the Big House. And so I went to visit with them, and I had a spec horror script I'd written that, of course, never got made. But they read it as a writing sample, and then they hired me to write Prison. And Rennie Harlan was already involved, and Rennie and I became great friends. In fact, we ended up living together because his housemate left, so I took over his room, and I always said it was just wonderful. Rennie got the girls, I got to make the breakfast, and but it worked out great, and we stayed good friends, and we made the movie with Vigo and Chelsea Field and Tom Everett, and of course Lane Smith, who was just absolutely terrific. And then from there, I was hired by Mark Lester to write Class of 1999, and kind of things just keep rolling along. But Prison was what brought me to Empire Pictures and to Charles and Albert Band. They were not the first stop. We were going to make the movie Cannon. That deal fell through, and Irwin had a long history with Charles Band because he had Compass International.
Now I'm wondering, because you have a lot of as you said, you've written a lot more movies than you've directed. So I'm just wondering, as a screenwriter, do you prefer a more hands-on approach, trying to be on set all the time, or do you prefer to kind of detach from it once the script is all done?
Well, I think that once the script is done, and if you've had a close relationship with the director, and I've been very fortunate with that, I would say about 99% of the time. So it just kind of, once things really get going, I've never seen any use in standing around with your arms folded going tisk, tisk, tisk when someone alters a line or something, because it's a different process. You've done your job, and now it's time for everybody else to do their job and make their contributions. But I will also say I've been also very fortunate in this, is that when major changes are to occur, and people say, well, can we do this? Can we do that? Or you have to do something practical, like a location gets lost and you have to rewrite material for, you used to be in the desert and now you're in the middle of a warehouse. And I've always had enough latitude that they've allowed me to be the one to make those changes. But no, I don't think it helps to be there to interfere, although it's always great fun to visit the set and see how everything's going. But also, for good or bad, folks have stuck pretty close to what I've put down on the page. I've never had any gigantic surprises. Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys was a bit of a surprise, but that's another tale we could certainly go into.
Oh, go on.
Well, that was an odd situation because that project was actually really shepherded by the Sci-Fi Channel, not by Full Moon, despite my being involved with it and Ted Nicolau and Adolfo Bartoli. And so it was developed within the Sci-Fi Channel, and they actually had wanted to try and possibly kick off a Puppet Master television series, but do it more in the tone of something like Gremlins and make it lighter. And so the idea was that the Andre Toulon character, the puppet creator, was going to be played by someone like Fred Willard. Well, okay. Of course, they cast Corey Feldman. And I was like, wow, okay, well, that's interesting. But what I fully expected to do was, well, that's fine, but this has to be rewritten to accommodate his age. The befuddled older professor character doesn't work for a guy who was 32 or something at the time. So let me rewrite it, and it's Andre Toulon's numbskull nephew or whatever it is we want to do, but then it'll be age appropriate. Well, they didn't do it for some reason. I've never really quite figured out why. And so they put Corey Feldman, maybe he just wanted to try something, and they put him in a white wig, and he did this thing with his voice. And I ran into him a few years after the movie was made, and he took my hand and go, "I'm sorry, man. I'm really sorry." I was like, "Oh, it's okay. I'm still here." But yeah, I don't know, because they did Ted Nicolau did a really nice job on that movie in a lot of spots, and they spent real money, I think, on the effects. Of course, it was a low budget film. It was done back to back with a movie called The Man with the Screaming Brain that Bruce Campbell had directed. Yeah, and I think they were shot in Bulgaria, and so they included all of kind of these effects that I had written of these small kind of drone-like things that go around on the floor and spy on people and shoot out little beams and do all kinds of crazy things. And I thought for sure something like that kind of prop manufacture or animation or however they're going to do it is usually very expensive. And so that's normally something that gets snipped. Nope, it was there. And so all that stuff was there, but then you just had this kind of odd performance as the centerpiece of the movie. So I'm still scratching my head a bit about that one.
And the fact that you said we're looking for a Fred Willard and they got Corey Feldman.
Yes.
Two very different performers.
Indeed. But you know, even when casting doesn't go exactly as you think it's supposed to go, and I'm usually in on casting, it's very, hey, that's the whole thing. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. Then you make sure that what you've written is liquid enough, certainly in a case of a movie like Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys, that you go in and you alter it and you make it fit the talent that you're going to put in front of the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in this case, they went another way, as they say.
Well, it's something I'd heard of before too. When they say they're looking for a type, I don't remember what actor this was, but he said that they were looking for a type like him, and he went and auditioned, and he didn't get the part.
I have as writers, and especially somebody, when you grab up assignments and things like that, or you go up for jobs, which everybody does. I was once up for a job at a film company that shall remain nameless, but they brought me in. It was a Friday afternoon, so already you're kind of half dead. Because nobody's going to hire anybody on a Friday afternoon. They're just blowing off time till the traffic eases up, but you sit there and you do your best. And I interviewed with this young lady, and she was very nice, very accommodating. But after a few minutes, she said, "Well, I really don't think you have the right background for this job." Okay, the problem is the job was a sequel to Class of 1999, which I had written. And she was sitting in front of the poster for my movie, I'm not kidding you, with my name coming out of her left ear. So I'm going, wow, really? So that's okay. I went across the street to the smokehouse and sat in the bar for a couple hours and fractured my American Express card. So that's
it's crazy. Some really weird stories coming out of Hollywood sometimes.
One of millions.
Yeah. So I want to ask you too, because Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys is the last thing I see you're credited with. So have you kind of moved on to something else? Are you planning on making another film or?
Oh yes, absolutely. What happened there? I mean, it was. I hear somebody shaking it off.
That was the talk.
Yeah. What really happened was there was a point too. The world of the B movie stuff really shifted economically for actually a rather major downturn. Back in the days when the VHS stuff was really cooking and Hollywood Video and Blockbuster and all those things existed, we were doing well. I mean, financially well. You could make your living, and the assignments, even for low budget companies, paid over Writers Guild minimum and all those things. So it was terrific. If you did 3 or 4 of those a year, everything was just fine. But I was in an odd spot because I've done assignments for major studios and I've done repair work at the studio level. But none of those movies that I ever worked on or developed were ever made. Of course, you get paid, but if it doesn't go to camera, and I wasn't going to be on anybody's A-list. I mean, I was like on the D-list somewhere, and certain executives liked me. But it's kind of one thing kind of compounds into the other. Also, the earth keeps turning, so as you get older, you discover, well, okay, I'm not the guy that Platinum Dunes was going to call to pen the remake of my own movie. So all these things kind of contribute one thing after another, and I sold some spec scripts, but they kind of languished. And so I decided that I was going to just say, well, the hell with it. I'm going to go in an entirely different area that I've always wanted to, and that was to start writing fiction, but more specifically, I wanted to write Western fiction. And I'd written a few Western screenplays that we had not been able to do much with, and this was long before the remake of True Grit and all that stuff kind of, opened things up a little bit. So when I told my agents this, they probably took maybe 4 milliseconds to drop me as a client. So I was like, okay. So I was in the process of a divorce. So I went to North Carolina to a family home there to lick my wounds and start writing fiction. And I got involved with the Western Writers of America, and thank goodness. And I was very, very lucky. I got published pretty quickly in an anthology, though, that was done overseas. And then right after that, I was asked to contribute a short story to a collection that included people like John Jakes and Elmer Kelton and Lauren D. Esselman, and that was for a major publisher, and that kind of kicked everything off. Now, I've always done film journalism, so I was doing all of that concurrently. I never really stopped that. And I've had some books published, often about Western movies, but about all different genres, and I was writing a lot for magazines and things like that, so I never stopped doing that stuff. But the fiction really began to have a life of its own, and I got anthologized a few more times and picked up some awards and things like that. And then the novels started, and I created a novel series for Pinnacle Books called Shotgun. And the first one came out about a year and a half ago, and in fact, the new one comes out next week.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm going to be doing it's called Shotgun: The Bleeding Ground, and then after that, I do installments 3 and 4, and they're from Pinnacle Books, and so we're at Walmart and Kmart and Target and all that good stuff. So it's been quite a little. I didn't really expect things to take this turn, but it did, and the irony being that the quote unquote, you've written a book, so you're a real writer. That varies in perception. But it's been true, and it's brought me right back to the studios. And last year, I developed a TV pilot for a company over at Paramount, and so it's funny. It's all kind of come full circle, and thankfully on a decent level. But it's a little. You just have to kind of sit there and smile and nod. And when somebody says, "Oh my gosh, this is so great," and they're waving your book around, you're going, you called security on me when I was at the front gate 5 years ago trying to get in to see you. Yeah. Well, that's not true, but you know what I mean. It's like, suddenly you have some sort of profile or legitimacy that I guess they appreciate. So you don't try not to take it too seriously, but that was, but it really was just a case of kind of reinventing myself, I guess, because quite honestly, I really didn't have any choice, and I just was like, well, they're not going to make me any more broke than I am, and it's worked out. So I'm very very fortunate with that.
Well, and I mean, going from screenwriting to fiction novel writing, I mean, you're still writing stories, right? You're still writing character, and you know, so I mean, it's a different format, but I mean, you're still writing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think of guys who, I mean, someone like William Goldman is just, he's an enormous hero to me because, oh my God, when I read the novel of Marathon Man, I just was absolutely knocked out by it. Little less knocked out by the movie, but here was a guy who was just like John Sayles. I mean, these guys jump back and forth between the two elements all the time. And as to that, I'll tell you just very quickly, I did a book of interviews that was published called The Westerners, and these were all these great, great friends of mine who were so kind and sat down with me and let me do these lengthy interviews about their career. So it's Warren Oates and Burt Kennedy and Glenn Ford and Jack Elam, and just a wonderful, wonderful collection. I'm very proud of this book, but the publishers wanted a really big name. Well, frankly, they wanted Clint Eastwood, but they wanted a really big name as the final chapter. And so I thought, okay, I had a lot of writer-directors represented because I had Burt Kennedy and Andrew Fenady, and AJ has written a lot of novels. But I said, well, let's go for the big one, and I called Elmore Leonard, and he was so kind to me, and we not only did we do the interview, and it was a great addition to the book, but he then promoted the book. Wow. It was just fantastic. And this was right as Justified was starting to get geared up and things like that. So, and of course he was so enormously successful, but talking to him and talking about his life in both film and also in fiction and within the Western writers of America, when I would talk to people like John Jakes and some of these writers who are icons, what I found interesting is that they always thought of themselves as fiction writers first because that was their success. Larry McMurtry, that was the success. And then Hollywood came to them afterwards. So they didn't really go after Hollywood. Elmore Leonard was a little different because he sold short stories to the movies back in the 50s, for which he was disastrously underpaid. But it was what he did as a novelist that brought Hollywood back to him. So I'm not in any way doing a comparison, but this was certainly a great inspiration. And as things kind of have taken off a little bit, it feels good to be a junior member of the pack. I'm a footnote probably, but it's great fun, and I'm very happy it's worked out.
It's cool you mentioned Elmore Leonard because he's one guy who they've made so many different adaptations of his books. I feel like he's gotten kind of like a 50-50 deal out of that.
Well, he felt that way too, and he told me a great story that when Hombre was made with Paul Newman, which is a wonderful movie, that was he got, I think, for the rights to his novel, because remember, these were the days everything he did, if he wrote a novel, it was published in paperback. Mm-hmm. So, and they had already done 2 movies based on his work, of course, 3:10 to Yuma, and the Bud Bedecker Western, The Tall T, with Randolph Scott. And he was paid very little for that stuff. But so he has 2 movies behind him. This huge movie is made. Paul Newman, Martin Ritt, the whole thing. This is right after HUD. And I believe he got like $3,500 or $4,000. Now that's 1966, and people were buying homes for $4,000, but still, probably closer to 10. But still, that was a lot of money. But it still was not enough for him to really completely stop writing advertising copy, which is what he did. Well, that's why he lived in Detroit. His wife found out that the screenwriters for Hombre got $200,000. And he said she was furious. I'm leaving you. I'm taking the kids. unless you do something about this. And so he made it a clause that the next time one of his books was sold, that he would write the script. And of course, he was very funny. He says, so we sold The Big Bounce. I wrote the script. It was the worst movie ever made in the history of film, and he wasn't able to write another screenplay for 5 years. So even the giants had their struggles, yes.
That's funny. I remember that movie. That wasn't great.
No, he always loved to say, well, the first one was the worst movie I've ever seen in my life until I saw the remake.
The Big Bounce, there were two versions?
There are two versions of that, yep.
Oh, okay, because I think I'm just thinking about the remake.
The one with Owen Wilson, yep.
Yeah.
There was an early one with Anthony Franciosa that, yes. Truly.
Equally.
Oh, worse.
Worse than the remake?
Well, probably now better because it's got nostalgia going for it.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't even know there was an original. Wow. Okay, I wanted to point something out too that I noticed on your credits. And now this is a pretty. I don't know if this is accurate because this is IMDb and they do make mistakes sometimes, but it says that you were a zombie in the original Dawn of the Dead. Is that right?
I certainly was. I will even send you a. In fact, I put that picture up on Facebook a few times. Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. Was that before? Was that like right in the midst of your horror fandom, I guess, or was that right before? Or?
Well, that was when I was in high school, and they were shooting at the Monroeville Mall. I grew up just outside of Pittsburgh in Sewickley, Pennsylvania. We moved there when I was like 10. So I knew all about George Romero and what have you, and my best friend's little brother. His best friend was Greg Nicotero, so I've known Greg since he was like a child. And so I got to do Dawn of the Dead, and we were out at Monroeville Mall, and the weather in Pittsburgh that winter had been just brutal. So they were having a lot of trouble getting extras to even be able to get out there because of road closures and things like that. And so everybody did everything. I helped the special effects man, a fellow named Gary Zeller, rig some bullet hits, and then they painted me gray. I remember Richard Rubenstein, I think, was the one who actually painted me gray, the producer. And I was actually in a few shots, but the one still where you can really see me is where we're all pressed up against the window of a glass door at J.C. Penney's, and then they open the door and we kind of tumble in, and I'm the zombie doctor, and I actually had a zombie nurse with me who was pulling a toaster behind her. And but it was anybody who could get out there. They either gave you different clothes, or they slapped a mustache on you, or they did something just because they needed as many people as possible, and the weather just was so brutalizing that a lot of people just couldn't show up. So everybody did double and triple duty.
That's crazy. Now you've done. Now I noticed. I saw a picture. I think this is IMDb. You've done some conventions? Is that right?
Oh yes.
I want to know if you have any weird or funny stories to come out of that.
Well, I think that, and everybody. I mean, my gosh, guys like Bruce Campbell, and I mean, they're these titans, and they're so used to this stuff. But I would say the oddest thing, and it was certainly very flattering, is I was at a convention, and a guy came up to me, and he had to show me that he had tattooed 6-shooter onto his forearm. So I was like, wow, from Puppet Master 3, and it was beautiful. It was, whoever did it did a gorgeous job. So I felt immortalized, but I've always been very, very fortunate with conventions and panels and things, and certainly when we were really doing a lot of movies for Full Moon, you got to do a lot of promotion and what have you, and you had kind of a presence at Fangoria and places like that. And it was a lot of fun. But that was the surprise was And I know Bruce has told me that he's like, on about, 2,000 people across the country, which doesn't surprise me to have all their ash tattoos. But I have this one, and I don't know, this guy kind of looked like he'd either end up, dead or in jail or both. So I don't know what happened to my 6-shooter friend, but
It kind of sounds like you all like you guys, well, at least some of you anyway, have kind of like a community, because you're talking about how you're talking to Bruce Campbell and like some of these other guys. Is that the case?
Well, I would say, well, yes and no, to be completely indistinct about it. I think that there was a point when there was actually kind of a little bit more, I think, tightly knit group, at least. But then, different levels of success, people find different social groups and things like that, just like anything, just like any business. Of course, we're always glad to see each other and what have you, but also marriage and children and moving away from California and all just the general life stuff kind of splinters things away, because we're all not, 30 years old, all, just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Getting those first movies made.
Yeah.
And but I think that there is a real, if you will, camaraderie that always exists within the horror community, and I think that's a constant. Because let's face it, almost everyone who makes horror movies, they come from a place of loving horror movies. It's the fandom aspect. It just never leaves you. And I'm of a specific fandom generation, but I'm here talking to you, and look, there's my half sheet to Son of Dracula, and there's my one sheet to Boris Karloff and the Body Snatcher. I mean, I'm looking at these right now, and a lobby card from the Mummy's Ghost. So I'm still very much that person.
Well, and I mean, you see a lot of people, when you see a lot of actors and like the same writers and directors show up in multiple horror movies, at that point, you gotta think, obviously that comes from a fandom, right? They're probably not just doing it for the money if they're focusing on that one genre.
Well, I think that goes both ways, because actors, of course, they want to act, they want to work. And if you get identified with a certain genre, let's take Jeffrey out of the mix and think about, say, someone like Ken Foray. And Ken's a really good actor, but of course he is known because of Dawn of the Dead, and then Jeff put him into Texas Chainsaw Massacre and things like that. So that's how he's recognized. And you have to also be a functioning professional person. So I think, too, the idea is, well, this is how I'm known. It's just like what Boris Karloff used to say, that how foolish it would be if a bootmaker rejected his own trademark. And so I think there's also the practicality of it, too. But when it comes to the love of it, you're not going to do a good job if you aren't excited and have a passion for what you're doing. If you're just phoning it in, I think people can tell, and they lose interest in what you're doing. So actors like Jeff Combs and Ken and Lynn Shay, and she just did a movie for a friend of mine, and she's terrific in it. These people, and there are quite a few others. Reggie Bannister is a great friend of mine. They're dedicated to what they're doing, not just as performers, but they love the genre. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't get excited enough to do the good work that they do.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna end this on one question. One more question. I've been doing this for the past few interviews, just based on your history and what we talked about and stuff. So I'm just gonna see what you think about this. So I'm gonna ask you, what is your favorite film adaptation of a novel?
Ooh, boy. Well, I would, in truth, just the knee-jerk thing, I don't think there's anything could really top Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. And I mean, Godfather 2 to me is almost the height of American filmmaking. It's a bloody masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. And what Francis Coppola and Mario Puzo did with that novel is, I think, just stunning.
That's a pretty safe thing.
But then there are a zillion others that I'm sure I could jump at. For horror, of course, the thing is, like, Dracula has gone through so many permutations because since Bram Stoker wrote the book, of course, you then had the stage adaptation, which really was what the movies took from, and everything else. But I've always loved what Jimmy Sangster and Terence Fisher and everyone did, of course, with Horror of Dracula. I think is wonderful, and so retains Stoker. And except for Keanu Reeves' horrible accent, I like Francis Coppola's movie too, because it's so visually unusual and has those great echoes of what Stoker wrote throughout. Is just absolutely wonderful. And let's see. I love Richard Fleischer's version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I think is just wonderful, and it's a superb adaptation of that book, because if someone sits down and reads Jules Verne, they go, "Wow, boy, this is just about fish." And so the creation of what they did with Captain Nemo and the structure of the story and everything is just absolutely superb and wonderful.
I was hoping you were going to mention Keanu in that Dracula movie.
Yeah, boy, you have to fight the good fight to get over those scenes.
I think that's one of the great mysteries in film is what was he going for?
and also too, I mean, Francis Coppola isn't stupid, obviously, so he saw that and didn't replace him.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I honestly, I look at that movie and I think, oh my God, if only they had said, "Sorry, Keanu," and they have brought in Jude Law or someone like that. Oh, what a difference.
It's now that I think about it too, that came out shortly after or around the time of Bill and Ted.
Yes, it did.
So I don't know what the casting idea was there, but okay.
And, well, for all we know, his involvement could have been a major component in the financing.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And yeah, sometimes you get another wonderful adaptation from a novel, and it was just a brilliant script by Ted Talley, of course, Silence of the Lambs. And see, we could just keep drawing, just pulling them from the air. That was wonderful.
How about one that you can think of that was just an abomination of the book?
Oh boy, there are. Boy, that's quite a long list. I think I'm trying to think of something I was really, truly disappointed with. It's well, okay, and this wasn't even. I mean, it was one of his major books, but I love Charlie Mathau, but boy, I think his version of Freaky Deaky's pretty bad, and didn't really serve Elmore Leonard well at all, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But he's a very tough one to capture, especially in the kind of the Get Shorty serial comic approach. And but yeah, that's it, because I love that book, and I'm afraid it didn't quite do it, but that was the old college try, and so that's one. And ooh boy, do I love there's no bigger fan of Clint Eastwood than me, but wow, Firefox just is not particularly good. And Craig Johnson's novel isn't that? Excuse me. I think it's Craig Thomas. his novel is not that intricate or anything like. In fact, just a good, great, solid espionage thing. But in that case, I think that the design of the effects of the aircraft it looked awkward. The way the plane was designed.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Eastwood didn't have a great deal of background with special effects at that time. So in a way, I think it's funny. It's interesting to look at Firefox. I mean, it's all professionally done, of course, but the difference between that and the way he so gorgeously integrated the effects into Space Cowboys, I mean, that's just night and day.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's and they did but there were a lot of Firefox novels. But yeah, that because I really look forward. I mean, it was a big thriller, and I was really looking forward to it. And I was like,
You gave it the old college try once again, right?
Yes, he did. You can't ever diminish that. And is Clint one of your regular listeners?
yeah, Clint's on here every second week.
Okay, well, yeah, I hope he doesn't get too busy. He's always been very nice to me, by the way, so I can't. But yeah, and I've never brought up my Firefox problem to it.
No, don't worry. I don't think Clint's
okay.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to keep on the line. I'm going to do the wrap-up, but I'm going to keep in the line for like another second after I say my fake goodbye.
Okay.
Okay, just give me 1 second here. Okay, so I want to thank you very much for coming by, talking about Lurking Fear and your career in general. Lurking Fear again was released on Blu-ray on June 15th, available pretty much everywhere, I would assume.
Yes, indeed.
And you guys can pick that up. It's a very fun horror movie with Jeffrey Combs and John Finch and a great cast. And thank you very much for stopping by.
Oh, well, thank you very much for letting me stop by.